This is a special bonus episode of the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, Fly Fishing Founders series where you hear behind-the-scenes stories from the companies who are going all in on fly fishing. This week we have Deli Fresh Design with Ross White.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. Today's show is sponsored by the Wet Fly Swing Member Society. Go to wetflyswing.com/members to check out the bonuses and discounts from all of our partner companies. In today's episode, I talk with Ross White from Deli Fresh Design. We talk about how Ross has created a company he runs currently as a one-man show, which includes sewing, marketing, and growing a company with a conservation ethic. We hear how Ross started out with Orvis, take a look at the Orvis Rod Factory, and find out how he gets around without a car. Don't miss this as Ross calls out TU a bit in this one for some of their mailers and how he thinks they could do a better job. So, without further ado, here's Ross White from DeliFreshDesign.com. How's it going, Ross?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We were just chatting there a little bit about some of your background. I learned something about you right off the bat, which I didn't know, and so we'll get into a little bit on that topic, which I think is good. On the bamboo, I guess. But maybe you could talk about first how you got into fly fishing and how Deli Fresh Design kind of all came to be.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Connecticut and then moved to Denver as a kid around the age of 12. But for that first 12 years, I lived within walking distance of an enormous lake and then a couple of little ponds. And so I spent most of my childhood up until moving to Denver, just walking down to the lake and fishing for panfish and trying to catch trout occasionally and bass. And then on top of that, I have an uncle who always fly fished. So I think the seeds of being obsessed now and fly fishing were kind of laid pretty early. Just given that I as soon as some of my earliest memories are of fishing and typically with my uncle. And so that kind of evolved when I was a kid. When I lived in Denver as a kid, I didn't really do anything fishing related. And then the irony is, so I went to college as well as boarding school for high school, and both places that were on bodies of water. So my boarding school was right on the Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island. And then my college was Fort Lewis in Durango, Colorado. So I ended up getting a job at Orvis, and so sort of learning what people's problems are, trying to solve my own problems as far as gear, and much of like the retail environment in a fly fishing shop is that someone has wants an easier solution to the problem of like how do we deal with the burden of carrying all this gear with us, and so. I love the idea of trying to help someone to, give them a better option, or have you thought about this or that? And, from my artistic background, I kind of started to delve into making a bag for myself as well. And it was something that I found frustrating, is that there was certain bags that I'd see that I liked, but as someone, I actually broke my right collarbone in college, and I really liked having a sling pack at the time, but almost every commercially available sling pack was only meant for a right-handed right shoulder, and there was a few other options, but I didn't really like any of them, and so or it seemed like too easy for me as an artist to like use the quick fix of buying something that's expensive or custom made. So it evolved into like, why not try to make something that's cool and symmetrical that, I would like to use to fish. It suits my needs. And that's sort of where I ended up starting to get like a sewing machine and started making some really simple little bags. And as someone who's always been kind of in the maker artistic category, I've always wanted to, if I was going to do something bag design wise, I would always want to do it myself, where I was making all the bags. and try to do all of it in the U.S. if I couldn't just personally do it myself.
Well, good. Yeah. And you were mentioning a couple things there. And one thing the Orvis thing I wanted to definitely touch on, because I didn't realize you worked with Orvis. But right at the start there, when you were digging in, you mentioned the boarding school. Is that, I've never been to a boarding school, you kind of think of different things. What was that experience like?
It was a good experience. I think it's sort of unique to the fact that I'm from the East Coast, that most people, especially in Colorado or even in like the West Coast, usually it's sort of the idea like, oh, what did you do wrong? Like,
right.
How did you screw up? So your parents, their last ditch effort to make you like a normal
right.
normal, like, contributing person in society.
Yep.
But for me, it was actually, so I have, my dad and my grandfather both went there. And so I kind of wanted, it was just sort of in my head as a kid that I wanted to go there.
Gotcha. Okay. And and then Orvis, can you talk about a little bit how you, the work you did there at Orvis, or you were in a local shop?
Yeah, I worked at the Orvis store in the Park Meadows Mall, which is a suburb of Denver. It's technically in the suburb of Lone Tree. It's basically just like I think Lone Tree specifically is kind of where there's a lot of like outcropping, or a lot of strip mall, sort of mall-y type stores. So it's sort of different from most people's sort of idea of like a cool fly shop, but I really liked it in that I had intentionally come to Denver kind of thinking that I wanted to be a guitar maker, and was trying to apply to work at a guitar shop, and that didn't really happen. And so I was like, I like fishing. Maybe I can, get a job at a fly shop. And so I applied sort of to a position at the Park Meadows store, and sort of went from there. And then I worked at after Orvis, I worked at an independent fly shop for 2.5 years in Denver. But I liked it. I like Orvis as a company. I think they're doing a lot of really cool, good stuff as far as their conservation and giving back. And I like that that they've probably been one of the most significant companies in sort of dissolving the notion of fly fishing as this elitist old white man sport. They've done everything that they possibly can to sort of break that down and make it inclusive to not only women, but just anybody who has an inkling to pick up a fly rod. And it's pretty cool that and I always say to people, it's better than forget about me teaching you. You should at least go and take the fly fishing 101 and the 201 courses, because it really sort of dissolves any of the confusion around the sport. But so for me, as a company, I was thinking, well, I can't do that, and I can't really do what Fish Pond does, which is use ghost nets to make they weave ghost nets into fabric specifically for their bags. And I was like, well, I can't really do that either. But one day I was watching a YouTube channel that I subscribed to, and there was someone using sailcloth and recycled climbing rope to make backpacks. And I sort of whacked myself on the forehead and said I could do that. And not only, and I could apply it to fly fishing, and I was like, and so I was sort of thinking like it would be great to be able to, throw money at a problem, but in the way that like a big company can, that they can, afford to donate to big conservation groups and stuff like that. But I can't do that. Not to say that I wouldn't want to if I had the disposable income. It's just that, as a company, especially in the fly fishing world, I felt like there was, it's sort of a requirement to be doing what you can to conserve and reduce waste. So I saw that and I was like, oh my God, I have to go out and do this.
What is the process like when you're, it seems like, obviously there's a lot of, overseas manufacturing going. So basically are all your products made in the US?
Yeah, so I'm right now. I design and come up with everything for the bags, and then I'm actually the one sewing everything currently.
Oh wow!
So yeah, we're not quite at the point where I need to outsource or hire someone. but hopefully we're going to get there at some point. And so, I mean, for me, I've realized my limitations in that I'm a pretty good sewer. I'm not the best sewer, but I still love to make products, and I'm always striving to make the perfect bag and something that the nice thing about that is that I think if you do want something that's perfect or like completely generic, then there's plenty of other opportunities to find that and from someone else. But I mean, I think it's more interesting to have not only a bag, know the person that made the bag, but also know that he could see where he went wrong, or maybe change something a little bit, and so that every product is sort of unique. It's not just mass produced straight out of the box from China and hand it to a customer. So a lot of times people ask like, "Oh, I like this bag, but could we do instead of sailcloth on these parts? Could we do wader or vice versa? Or I like digital camo, but I maybe not on this go around or this bag." And so I'm pretty easy to work with people on that stuff. Or
Gotcha.
Could you put straps here? Can carry a rod tube or straps there, that kind of thing.
Cool. Well, let's I want to get back to some of the stuff on your designs, because that is pretty interesting how you're, doing it all like one man show and some of your long-term plans. But I did want to get into a little bit on the bamboo, because I'm kind of interested in bamboo. It seems like, back in the day, obviously the bamboo, was the go-to rod, and then it kind of went away a little bit, but it seems like it's out there pretty good. Can you talk about, maybe you can just give a little brief history on bamboo, maybe the recent history on bamboo, where if you think, has it come back and where we're at, and then talk about what you're doing with bamboo.
I don't know if it's made the comeback that fiberglass has. Certainly that you don't see like company like Orvis or like Thomas & Thomas really pushing the fact that they still, or like even Winston. I know Winston's bamboo shop just burned down. I think it was last year or the year before, and I think they've are certainly going to plan on bringing it back, but it's a slow process to bring it back. But prior to moving and working for Orvis, I had visited the rod shop in Manchester, Vermont for Orvis, and saw a couple of guys making bamboo rods. And so that
what did that rod shop? What's when you walk into the Orvis in Manchester? What's that? What does it look like?
I think it's a lot different from what most people think, because most people are like, "Oh, Orvis, they sell women's, clothing. They're just mass produce everything." But you'd be surprised by how small the rod shop is in Manchester for Orvis. It's I think on par with probably any high end rod company like Winston or Scott or Thomas & Thomas. It's probably just about the same size as all of those shops, but they just happen to have a bigger company around it.
Which is the size of a house, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, it's bigger than a house, but it's not, it's like maybe, it's probably the size of two normally like regular sized Orvis stores. If you put two Orvis stores together, it's about the size of of the rod shop.
And you got a few guys in there kind of hard at it, or what's that look like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's one side where they're doing all the like rolling and for the carbon fiber and the fiberglass. And then there was a couple of guys at the time that I saw that were making bamboo rods, sort of selecting strips and stuff like that. And then on the other side, they were doing all the finishing. Oh yeah. So for me, that was like, that's so cool that they're making these. I mean, sort of right there, I was like, dream job would be working for Orvis, learning how to make rods.
That's cool. That's cool.
And then so,
which you did, and actually, I had Tom Rosenbauer was on in '63, and I asked him, on Orvis what I can't remember the question exactly, but kind of what they do best. And that was his answer, was they make the rods, or what they do best, and they do a lot of stuff. Yeah. So that's pretty, that's pretty powerful.
I mean, it's pretty cool from a historical perspective that they've been, I'm not sure exactly what year they started making rods, but they've been doing it probably for about a century. Yep. Which is pretty amazing. Yeah. So I learned about them, and then I found out about Thomas & Thomas because they're kind of in my backyard, or like kind of in the area. And then there's a really cool tradition of like Catskill and New England bamboo rod makers with the probably everybody you need to know about that's been historically, impactful on bamboo rod making at one point or another has a connection to Leonard and F.E. Thomas, which were both companies that started in the mid 19th century, so like 1850s, and really are the companies that created the 6-strip bamboo rod. So from there, there's this guy, Mark Aroner, who's still alive and makes really cool rods. He's got a really cool presence on Instagram with his company's Spinoza Rods and or rod company or bamboo rods. And I guess in the first year I moved back to Colorado, I met Ross, who is another Ross who owns the Denver Fly Shop, and sort of casually at his shop said that he made bamboo rods, and I was like, oh man, that's so cool. I'd love to try learning it. And he's like, oh, I teach people to do it. So he sort of opened the door for me, and since then I've been making rods on my own. Here and there I've sold a couple, and mostly still sort of in the designing and getting better at every element of it. On my own. So it's pretty cool to do that and to put together a rod that from start to finish that I had my hands on every part of it. So
gotcha. Yeah, that's cool. And then, yeah, you're talking about from the very beginning, grabbing a piece of bamboo and just the whole process. Is that how long does that take you to, from the very start to the very end, if you want to?
That's tough for me, just because it's hard to if I've got bag orders and then. Oh yeah. I'd say I think I got one rod done. It was quick. It was a quick turnaround. It was I had a deadline of about a month. Yeah. But it was if I was just doing rods, I'd probably be able to crank out a rod every month or so.
So what is your if you'd say your home river, the closest river, and you're in Colorado, right?
Yeah, so I'm in Colorado. I'm in Denver. So one of the things that's pretty cool about my studio space, where I do make everything out of, is that basically there's west of me is the highway, and then west of the highway, or about like a block away from me is the highway, and then another block is the South Platte. Oh yeah. Which is pretty polluted and getting better in Denver, but there is fantastic carp fishing. The Denver Town Limited chapter also stocks it pretty regularly with trout, and then from one of the Chatfield reservoirs, some of the spill from that ends up with some smallmouth bass. But I've yet to catch a smallmouth bass, but I've caught trout and carp in the local South Platte. So it's pretty cool to in the afternoon just ride my bike over there for a couple of hours, do that. But then but I also go to so further south from Denver, about an hour and a half south, is the notorious section of Deckers, and then also Cheeseman Canyon. So I regularly fish the Deckers for trout, and then occasionally get Cheeseman, and occasionally get down to other rivers like the Colorado and briefly fished the Eagle last year and the Arkansas, but right now I'm carless, so part of my whole sort of just if I could, it'd be ideal to own a car just so I could have the access to fishing, but to even commute on a daily basis in a car is just not who I am. Yeah. So it's nice to be able to have those options, and I've got good friends and family that I can borrow cars from or go fishing with, so that helps.
So you're carless by choice, just to you'd rather use the bike.
Yeah, I've right now I'm kind of starting to think about. I'm kind of in the process of trying to buy a little mini or cargo van. Oh yeah, like a small Ford cargo van, so I can drive across country this summer. I planning to be in the Catskills for a couple of weeks, and want to stop off on the Driftless area in Wisconsin and the Au Sable and Michigan, and then I've got a friend in Cleveland that I'm going to stay with, and so I'm going to kind of do that. get my bass fishing fix in and Connecticut and New York and then come back. But even if I had a car, I just driving every day to me kind of makes me nauseous. So so I ride my bike quite a bit.
Is the bike in Denver's a pretty good biking city?
It is a pretty good biking city. There's the cool thing about the South Platte is that the section in town, so pretty much all the way from like Littleton, which is about like 10 miles south of where I am, where like the Chatfield Reservoir, which is so the South Platte flows north, and so so for like 10 miles, it's pretty much it's all bike path, and if you got a fishing license for Colorado, you can fish all of it. It's all public access along there, so it's pretty remarkable. If you want to go sight fishing for carp, you've got plenty of space to do it in.
Gotcha.
And then there's plenty of street bike signs, but Denver's a booming city, so there's a lot of cars on the road, and I think people are a little preoccupied with cell phones and things like that, so it makes it a little scary on a bike.
Yeah, totally. Does it get a little? Have you had some close calls out there?
Once in a while, I get cut off by a bike or a car, and then but there's a frontage road. So between the highway and my studio, there's a frontage road that I take out every day on my way home, and I just look and I'm like, glad I'm not sitting in traffic like everybody else on the highway.
No kidding, that's awesome. Yeah, so, you're getting your exercise while in traffic. That's cool. Okay, well, good. So it sounds like, definitely it sounds like you're doing things, a little bit differently, and that makes sense. It sounds like, I think that's what your Deli Fresh Design is, the same thing. You have that conservation ethic, and we talked about Orvis, and that's I've definitely we've had that conversation on here before, but the cool thing about Orvis is that they are, they're privately held, so they can speak up on whatever they want. And you're the same. Do you jump on some of that as far as the conservation issues and some of
it's something that I wish I was better at as far as getting involved with, and something that I thought about, especially from a company standpoint, getting involved with TU and sometimes I get frustrated and my reluctance with Trout Unlimited from a personal standpoint is that it's I've learned methods through using recycled materials and how to reduce waste and not be part of the problem. And I love what TU does, but and I was a member for a couple of years back, but that sort of completely rubs me the wrong way. And as their business model, that I'm sure anybody who's ever subscribed to anything they've done or become a member is that you pay for a membership for a year and you get about $40 membership and you get about $100 worth of junk mail.
Oh.
And so to me, I think it really irks me that a company that's a conservation group is on one hand doing all these really good things for trout, but also doing nothing or being part of the problem as far as paper waste.
Right. What would be what would be your recommendations of a way they could do it better?
It would be amazing if Trout Unlimited went paperless. I think it'd be a huge step in the right direction. Especially as a conservation group that touts helping trout habitat, jokingly, but in some ways they're helping to contribute to deforestation by trying to consciously, if they went paperless, they'd be like, instead of being part of the problem, we're going to be part of the solution, not just for trout, but for other things too. And they're a big enough organization that they could be doing that. So from my own perspective, I think, I don't want to be sitting in traffic, but as a company, I'm trying to reduce my impact, by riding a bike or taking, the bus or shared cars, stuff like that for commuting. And then, when I go fishing, I'll get in a car, but I try to go with other people. And so I think there's things that as consumers that we can do on a daily basis, not just to throw money at a problem. I think that's the last thing we should be doing is sort of deciding where we can make an impact on a personal level. And I think my own mentality of doing those things on a daily basis, like driving or riding a bike, and then trying to see what materials I can use that reduce waste, or what I'm trying to do as a person and as a company.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I think if down the road we become a big company with disposable income, I would definitely be trying to speak out more and doing it strategically. Yep. And I think
is that
one of the
your
things
plan?
that I would.
Is that your plan down the? I mean, if you said 5-10 years from now, if you look at what you'd like, would you like to see a big company? See this turn into a big company with a lot of people working for you, that sort of thing?
I mean, I think there's a limit to it. I don't think I'd ever want it to be where it's something where I don't have most of the control over it. But I do like the idea of creating a company that employs other creative craftspeople like myself.
So do you think you can get to where you want to get? So you just by yourself, you can't. I mean, because there are people doing maybe not with physical products, but there are people doing one-man shows where they don't want to get into a bunch of employees and they like where they're at.
Yeah.
That's kind of,
I guess I haven't gotten to the point where I have to make that hard decision. The decision, I guess, could be made either where I decide to do everything in-house, control the process, or I have to outsource. But as I said earlier, I don't have any interest in doing outsourcing to China or anything like that. It's just to me, it is like, why would I bother? Why bother with that?
What's outsourcing? I mean, is outsourcing in the U.S., is that a pretty realistic?
Yeah, it's possible. There's people that do it, like basically where it's just, instead of me sewing something, I can find contract people that would sew stuff for me. But I just haven't gotten to the point yet. But down the line, I would like to be doing that. I'd rather be, like I said earlier, my mind is more driven to like evolving a design and making it better and improving on it, and not necessarily just about making a design, sticking with it, and then making 1,000 of them. So that can be done. I can do that, but it's also not what I love. So for me, design evolution and make something better and always striving to make it better is what I love to do.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And so, down the line, if I've got the income, I mean, I'd love to use, like my weight and money to especially with, conservation efforts. I think, one of the things that I find hard, I would love to see happen, is these big conservation groups trying to not just preach to the fly fishing communities, but to people outside of the fishing community about raising I think like one great example of this is that everybody in the fly fishing world that has a soul has signed a petition for against the Pebble mine.
Yeah.
But if you talk to anybody who's never if you talk to, I think on a macro level, we could, as a community, say like Trout Unlimited could take or Patagonia could take an ad out in the Super Bowl and just draw awareness to it. On a micro level, I can tell 5 people that don't know about it. About that, it'd be like, hey, this is what's going on. This is what's happening.
Which one do you think is better, the micro or the Super Bowl ad?
I don't know. I think we could always ideally hope for both, but as an individual, it's probably more likely that I could make more of an impact by telling the people around me who don't know about it than just complain to other people that fly fish that Donald Trump is again. Thought we solved this problem again. We're dealing with this, but you're just preaching to everybody who already knows, who's already on the same side. But right now, I think we need to. For that, it's probably better to be like, hey, I know you don't fly fish, but you seem like the kind of person who doesn't want big oil destroying Alaska, and so maybe go sign a petition or just go look and see what it's like, and see if there's not just the president but other politicians that you could consider not voting for in midterms or next elections, so that hopefully that doesn't happen.
Exactly.
That's
a great idea. Well, I was thinking, as we wrap up here, just a couple, you're thinking about, as I was talking about your company here, do you have any tips for somebody who maybe has is getting started, maybe has an idea for a product in the fly fishing space and is possibly struggling to get started? I mean, you're at a point where you've got this great product. Obviously it's a passion thing for you, but would you offer any tips for somebody new to it?
Yeah. I mean, I think like, for what's been positive to me, and I'm definitely kind of an introvert that has extroverted tendencies, but, it's nice to, one of the things that, and we have one coming up, is the Fly Fishing Rendevouz. And I did it sort of 2 years ago, and this will be the third year I've done it. And, the first time I kind of went sort of as a sink or swim kind of thing, and I got a lot of feedback. Sold a lot less than I thought I would, but I made a lot of friends in the industry. And so, I think it's nice to always, meet other people that are like-minded, meet people, at a fly fishing show, and just sort of even just walk around, see what other people are making.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I think your life, and my life has become much more enriched by reaching out and asking people for help, or asking people a question.
Yep.
You're only as good as you think you are until you ask someone for help. I mean, I think, a big part of what's helped me in the last year is, having my dad come on board is basically, the sort of the nuts and bolts sort of, he has a background in business and in venture capital, and having him help me from a business standpoint, being like, oh, this is where we should devote our money as far as advertising goes, or I think we should pursue this person because they seem interested in, like, being a big wholesale account.
Yeah.
So having the feedback and having someone to bounce ideas off with, that's huge.
That is a great, and I was just thinking on the advertising, and I'm glad you brought that up, because you're going to be, I'm not sure when this episode comes out, but yeah, it's likely that you'll be a sponsor for the show here. And so I think it's a good point you make that, what I'm doing here is just trying to basically find, good companies that have a good message. And I think in the fly fishing space, there's a lot of good companies. But it is interesting because I occasionally get pitched by companies, and recently I was pitched by one that wanted to be a sponsor, and ultimately I, decided to say no. And it was mainly because I wasn't that familiar with the product, or, just wasn't sure about it. And I didn't want to promote anything that I didn't have a, the best thing is to have personal experience, and the second best thing I think is to be referred to by people that really well.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
how do you deal with that? I mean, how do you first know where to go, and then how do you know when you do get pitched by other people or companies? How do you know when to say no?
Well, I mean, I think it's sort of it's funny. It's sort of like dating in some ways. It's the people that are interested are not hard to work with. The people that you seem to be calling back all the time are the ones that are harder to deal with, and might end up coming back. But it's nice that when the things are easy and they kind of happen with limited, back and forth or whatever. There's that, and so those are nice. And I mean, I think probably 2 years ago, when I was just getting started, really, I had a couple of guys who were I think spin fishermen who fish from kayaks, and they had this idea of a bag, like a boat bag that they wanted, and they also wanted to have like a pocket that was for their concealed carry. And I was like, from a business standpoint, I was like, I probably can't say no to this if it comes my way. But then, and then they were very apprehensive about, wanting to have me sign, non-compete stuff. So like this kind of thing where it's like, so these tight guarded, and I think you almost, those people are just like, so paranoid about losing their control of their idea that it might even not be that great of an idea in the first place. And so you just, you kind of have to take a leap of faith for anything, to at least to get it out there and be like, yeah, I could make a prototype for you. Like, sure. Yeah. But like the idea of wanting me to not be able to compete for 5 years in a fly fishing world or fishing world period is kind of crazy.
Yep.
And certainly not like, the kind of thing that I think is interesting. And I mean, I recently had some people sort of comment on Instagram about like, oh, your stuff's really really similar to Rendevouz, and and I it's true. I mean, I've used similar camos to them. But but for me to explain to someone that we do something very different, our designs are different, and we use different different constructions. Our bag, it's very, to a consumer, it's hard to explain that to someone. But then, I mean, one of the great examples of reaching out or learning from other people is I'm blanking on his name, but the guy who owns Rendevouz was very opening and welcoming to me when I met him at a fly fishing show. He was like, "This is where you need to go for this material. Like, this is what you should be thinking about." While that happened on Instagram, I know from a fact, from a personal interaction with the owner of Rendevouz, that he doesn't see what I'm doing as competition. No. He sees that what I'm maybe a little bit, but I think he sees what I'm doing is that I want to go in the same direction as he wants to go with the fly fishing world. That we're providing someone with an alternative to something that was made overseas, and there's always an alternative design. That what they do is different from what I do. I provide a different type of bag than what they have. So I think that there's always room for that, and hopefully we're both could take the industry in a different way, where more things can be, or more people in the fly fishing community can get stuff that are they can demand that their bags made in USA. Right now, there's still the people that see they're like, oh, I would never buy a fly rod that wasn't made in the US. But I wouldn't even think twice about buying a bag made in China. But for them, I think it's because they haven't been given that bag until now. Yeah, that they don't have that option, so they just accept it. But I think switching that and changing that, I think, is cool.
Yeah, no, I'm right on. Yeah, I was gonna say with Scott, I think it's Scott from Rendevouz. Scott. Yeah, totally. I totally agree. I think you're right on, and I think with the ideas is that it's the whole thing where ideas are the easy part. It's sticking with the plan, right, for a long enough time. Yeah, that's the harder part.
Yeah, I definitely felt like, too, from like a starting out standpoint, when I did that first show, it was sort of like you kind of have to take a leap. Like there is like a thing where like, you do have to jump off a cliff. Hopefully it's not a very big cliff, but there is that jump that you have to make, where you do have to like, sort of commit to it, in a certain amount of sense, that like, it's not just like a casual hobby, unless that's what you want it to be.
Yeah. Have you jumped off? Have you jumped off yet? In full?
I think. Well, I've got a part-time job, so I haven't fully jumped off. But I've for the first 3 months of this year, I didn't have another job, so that scary. But it's nice to know. Yeah, I'm getting there.
Yeah,
not quite there yet, but
I was just thinking that this quote that I had. I always think about, actually, it's probably one of my favorite quotes, because it gets to that point when you start, and I think just now I received some, negative feedback on something here, but part of leadership, a big part of it is the ability to stick with a dream for a long time, long enough so the critics will realize that you're going to get there one way or another, so they eventually follow, because that's the thing, is that I think a lot of people, like with what you're saying with your products, people are kind of like, oh, you're just copying this, but it's bottom line is that if you stick with it long enough, everybody's going to figure out what you just told, the story you just told us today, right?
Plus, I don't know if it's worth trying to explain to someone who just thinks that I'm copying someone else.
Yeah, it's true.
Because they obviously think I'm copying, but if they took the time to learn or to explain, it'd be like, if they saw both bags side by side, it'd be like, oh wow, they are different. Like they are very different. But those nuances get lost on people.
I hear you.
But I was going to say, it's a great example of a company, going back to Orvis, of like seeing that people want that want more made in USA stuff, is the fact that like the new Mirage reel from Orvis is a great example of them seeing that people demand not only do they demand a rod made in the U.S., but they demand a reel made in USA. And so to can be competitive, that's what they're doing is bringing it back to the U.S., which I think is really cool. And I think, so, I mean, I love Simms waders. They could be doing a lot more. I mean, they make great waders and they're doing that in the U.S. I just wish that they were making more. I mean, and part of the reason why I started was because they weren't making their bags in the U.S. anymore. So, or the same way with Fish Fond. I love their designs. I think they're awesome. I think that they've got such a cool model, and I wish I could be at the point where that I could, be sourcing someone to use ghost nets to weave into fabric that I exactly want to use in my bags. But
do you know
from?
Sorry,
I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you know of any companies that are, basically the size of Simms or a huge company, or whatever big company that is actually doing it all in the U.S.?
I don't know. Probably not. It's probably, not in the fly fishing world. I think the only companies that are examples of that are like, Ross and Abel and Scott, who are Hatch, or managed to be able to make all their bags. I take that back. Have you heard of Rising Nets?
Yeah, I have. I think I have heard. Yeah.
They're not at the same size as Simms, but they're definitely a big company, bigger than I am. And they make sweet nets. I bought one of their nets, and part of that was because it was made in USA. And cool. And I thought that was so cool that they were doing that. And
how do you stay ahead of the game? I think of, again, another quote, Wayne Gretzky, the quote of, you don't go to where the puck is, but you go to where, it's going to be or whatever. I mean, how do you, because it seems like that's a tough thing. You've got to always kind of be reinventing. It's not easy. Yeah.
It's not easy, but like I said, I think my head wanders all the time about whether I'm riding my bike or I'm at my other job. I'm in my head all the time, deconstructing the bag I make, and how do I tweak this? How do I improve that? And so I think there's never sort of resting on your laurels, always moving forward or trying to make it better. Yeah. So, I was going to say the good sort of like quote for the person starting out is another Gretzky quote, which is you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Oh,
that's a good one.
So
you miss 100%. That kind of goes to the famous, probably everybody's, or a lot of people have heard the Michael Jordan one, which is, I'll put a link in the show notes. I won't quote that one fully, but there's one about how he's, taken 50 game winning shots, or he's missed 50 game winning shots. He's failed, basically the whole thing about fail, but he succeeds because he doesn't give up. He keeps trying.
Yeah. I think the other thing too that I've sort of saw about, and like another person that is Topo Designs, is a big company here in Denver, and they're sort of in between, much higher up, closer to like the becoming more like a Patagonia, where they make a lot of clothing now. But they started with bags, and for me in my head, before I met the owners, I was like, oh, they're doing something different. I don't like that. But then I met the owners, and they were completely open and very welcoming and wanted to talk. And then through them, I got involved with their wholesale distributor in Japan. And so for me to, I met Jed, who's one of the co-owners, at a panel discussion. He was on a panel for other small business makers and company owners, and I saw him afterwards, and I was like, I could have the ego or be afraid to talk to him, but there's, even if we just have a conversation and say, hey, I own DFD, maybe you've heard of us, maybe you haven't, it's nice to meet you. Maybe through that interaction, I would have, be like, oh, whatever. But because I talked with him, my business has grown because of it. Whereas if I hadn't talked to him, I'd be 3 steps behind still. I mean, the cool thing too is he even suggested doing a pop-up in his store, and so I got to do a pop-up, and it helped me create connections. And so never being afraid to talk to someone is like, I have to do this for my own sake. I'm at that point where it's like, oh, if I want to make money, or if I want to grow my business, I have to take those risks that me as a person might not want to take. But from a business owner's perspective, I have to, or it doesn't make sense not to, or, what could it harm?
Yep.
It could only improve myself and my company. So
I hear you. I think that, I think that's the great thing is, that's probably the best tip right there, is just to keep reaching out to people and networking, or whatever, however you want to describe it.
Yeah.
That's what I've been, that's what I'm doing, here, and connecting with you. And
yeah, absolutely.
So, and I think that's the thing you gotta, I think, maybe you don't have to enjoy it, but it helps to when you do enjoy it. And that's something I've really liked to have those conversations. Cool. Yeah. All right, Ross. Well, that's about all I have in the next 6 to 12 months. Anything you wanted to announce that you have coming up for people? Anything new with you or the brand or the company?
Well, I guess, like I said, I'm going to be at the Fly Fishing Rendevouz in a week's time. I don't know when this is going to air, but I'm going to be in Denver for that. And then I'll be driving across the country through the Midwest and in the Catskills this summer in June. And I'll just let people know that if you look for the hamburger trout on the side of a white Transit Connect van, that's probably me, and say hi. And I'll probably be stopping by some fly shops, and hopefully I'll make it up to when I get back. It's up in the air, but I might end up in Montana and Western Colorado. Those are places that are all on my bucket list as far as places I want to fish. So
perfect.
Keep an eye out. I'll probably post pictures on Instagram of the van when I find one and everything. So people will be able to say hi and say hello.
Nice. All right. Well, it's good to, and I'll keep up with you there, and I'll put some links to stuff we talked about in the show notes, and it'll be good. Like I mentioned before, we're going to have you on, I think, as a sponsor. So this is going to be really cool to keep in touch with you. And I appreciate you, sharing your stories. I think we went a little bit longer than I was originally talking about here, but I think, your story is a good one, and I appreciate you as a sponsor, because I think your message is one that I think everybody should hear about. So it's going to be fun, I think, this summer, and we'll definitely just keep in touch.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. See ya.
Bye.
So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes with all the links we covered, just go to wetflyswing.com/Ross. Head over to the member society at wetflyswing.com/members to go deeper with the podcast community and maybe get some answers to questions you have, or for our next guest. That's wetflyswing.com/members to get started today. Thanks again for stopping by to check out the show today. I'm looking forward to catching up with you soon, and hope to maybe see you online or on the river. Also, I haven't mentioned this in a little while, but it would be great if you can share this episode with one other person you think might enjoy some of the content here. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. I don't think we've had a review out there in quite a while. So thanks a lot. See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.